Legal and Privacy Brief for May 27, 2026. Dutch authorities arrested 2 IT entrepreneurs suspected of providing infrastructure for Russian cyber operations and violating EU sanctions, seizing over 800 servers. EFF analysis revealed widespread Alper mission creep, with police using license plate readers for school residency verification and noise complaints without warrants. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, contractor exposed AWS Gov cloud credentials in a public GitHub repository after disabling GitHub's default security protections, in what security researchers called the worst leak I've witnessed. Here's the full breakdown of today's top legal and privacy stories. Legal and Privacy Brief, May 27, 2026. Next section, Enforcement Actions. Dutch authorities dismantle Russian cyber infrastructure, EU sanctions violations. Dutch Fiscal Information and Investigation Service, FIAD, arrested a 57-year-old Amsterdam resident and a 39-year-old from The Hague for violating EU sanctions by providing hosting infrastructure used in pro-Russian cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns. The company under investigation, founded February 10, 2022, 2 weeks before Russia's Ukraine invasion, was sanctioned by the EU on May 20, 2025. Investigators searched 3 business premises and 2 data centers, seizing administration records, laptops, phones, and over 800 servers. Reporting by Corrective and De Volkskrant identifies the suspects as concert pianist Andri N., operator of MI Roasting, and business consultant Yosef Z., owner of Work Titans, who allegedly provided services to Moldovan brothers Ivan and Juri Nekulidis, Stark Industries hosting firm. The infrastructure was used to host reliable recent news websites tied to the Doppelganger disinformation campaign and DDoS attacks by pro-Russian group No Name 057. 16. Targeting European government agencies. Compliance action. Organizations providing hosting or VPN services must implement enhanced customer due diligence for high-risk jurisdictions and ensure systems flag EU-sanctioned entities. Review vendor contracts for sanctions compliance clauses and document screening procedures for regulatory audits. Sources: The Record. Federal court dismisses criminal charges against Kilmar Abrigo Garcia for vindictive prosecution. U.S. District Judge Waverly Crenshaw dismissed criminal charges against Kilmar Abrigo Garcia, finding the Trump administration engaged in vindictive prosecution. Garcia was among the initial wave of deportations sent to El Salvador's Secot maximum security prison despite fact-free allegations of MS-13 gang membership. The court found HSI agent Van Wy's decision to reopen a closed November 2022 traffic stop investigation, combined with acting Attorney General Todd Blanche's public statements tying the investigation to Garcia's successful lawsuit, created a presumption of vindictiveness the government failed to rebut. The court cited former Attorney General Robert H. Jackson's warning about prosecutors picking the person first and the crime second. Associate Deputy Attorney General Akash Singh's close substantive oversight of the prosecution team further demonstrated vindictive intent. Compliance action. Government contractors and Immigration Counsel should document any instances of enforcement pattern changes following protected legal activity. Maintain detailed timelines of case closures and reopenings for potential vindictive prosecution defenses. Source: TechDirt. Next section, Litigation Updates. Supreme Court reverses Fourth Circuit in immigration judge speech case. Margolin v. Nage, the Supreme Court reversed the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit in a 5-page unsigned order, finding the lower court relied on an argument the National Association of Immigration Judges had not made and had affirmatively waived. The case challenged a Department of Justice policy requiring immigration judges to obtain permission before making official speeches at immigration conferences and pro bono training sessions. U.S. District Judge Leonie Brinkema originally dismissed the case under the Civil Service Reform Act, which channels federal employee claims to the Office of Special Counsel and Merit Systems Protection Board rather than district courts. The Fourth Circuit had questioned whether those CSRA entities were still functional given MSPB lack of quorum, and the Trump administration's position that the president can remove the special counsel and MSPB members for any reason. The Supreme Court held federal courts must respect CSRA jurisdictional limits regardless of downstream entity functionality concerns. Source: Scadu S. blog. Florida denied original jurisdiction in interstate driver's license dispute. The Supreme Court declined to serve as the court of first review for Florida's contention that California and Washington are allowing undocumented immigrants to obtain commercial driver's licenses. Florida sought to invoke the court's original jurisdiction for disputes between states. The justices did not add the case to their 2026-27 term docket. Original jurisdiction cases are rare and typically involve territorial boundary disputes or interstate resource conflicts where no lower court forum exists. Source: Scadu S. blog. Hustler Hollywood FACTA class action settlement. Hustler Hollywood reached a class action settlement benefiting customers whose receipts displayed more than the last 5 digits of a card number, violating the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act, FACTA. FACTA amendments to the Fair Credit Reporting Act prohibit merchants from printing more than the last 5 digits of card numbers or expiration dates on electronically printed receipts. Violations carry statutory damages of $100 to $1,000 per violation. Compliance action. Retailers should audit point-of-sale systems to verify receipt truncation compliance. Review receipts from the past 3 years for FACTA violations and implement automated compliance checks before printing. Source: Top Class Actions. Kalshi faces Washington TCPA class action over unsolicited refer-a-friend text prediction market. Exchange Kalshi Inc. faces a class action alleging it sent unsolicited commercial text messages to Washington state residents without their knowledge or consent under the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. Washington state TCPA analog provides private right of action and treble damages for violations. Refer-a-friend programs must obtain prior express written consent before sending marketing texts, with consent defined as a signed written agreement clearly authorizing specific marketing messages. Compliance action. Review marketing automation platforms for compliant consent mechanisms. Washington state requires opt-in consent recorded before first message, separate from account creation or transaction confirmations. Source: Top Class Actions. Canvas Learning Platform data breach. Exposed millions of student and teacher records and structure. Disclosed a data breach involving its Canvas learning management platform in late April, potentially exposing millions of student and teacher records worldwide. Canvas serves over 6,000 educational institutions globally. No additional details on the breach vector, compromised data types, or remediation timeline were provided in the disclosure. Compliance action. Schools using Canvas should review student data processing agreements for breach notification obligations and verify whether the breach triggers FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, reporting requirements. Educational institutions must notify affected students and families within regulatory timelines and assess whether credit monitoring or identity theft protection services are warranted. Source: Top Class Actions. Next section: Privacy Developments. EFF uncovers widespread permission creep in police searches. EFF analysis of millions of flock safety automated license plate reader searches revealed police agencies using ALPR databases far beyond specific criminal investigations, including school residency verification, employment background checks, and noise complaints. Beaufort City Schools in Georgia ran over 375 ALPR searches between January 2025 and March 2026 for residency verification, accounting for over half of all searches and 3/4 of 2026 searches. Officers searched across more than 5,800 different networks nationwide, revealing when families go to doctors, worship services, nighttime activities, and vacation travel. The analysis found no warrant requirement has fostered unrestricted access to sensitive location data. ALPR networks have been used to surveil protesters, abortion seekers, immigrants, and ethnic Roma populations. Compliance action. Schools and employers should cease ALPR-based surveillance for administrative functions. Legal counsel should review state wiretap and privacy laws for potential civil liability from warrantless location tracking. Implement policies prohibiting investigative use of commercial surveillance databases without probable cause and judicial authorization. Source: EFF Deep Links. Lithuania investigates theft of 600,000 state registry records by foreign actor. Lithuanian prosecutors are investigating a major data breach affecting the Center of Registers that exposed over 600,000 records from the real estate and legal entities registers. Attackers misused login credentials assigned to institutions authorized to access the databases, with the breach likely originating from a foreign country. Compromised data included names, dates of birth, national identification numbers, property addresses, cadastral information, and registry numbers. Financial damage exceeds euros 111,000, $129,000. Center of Registers Chief Adrigis Juices resigned following the breach and blamed years of underinvestment in state IT infrastructure, estimating euros 60 million, $69.8 million in upgrades needed to meet modern cybersecurity standards. Former Defense Minister Laurinas Kasiunas alleged the breach showed hallmarks of a Russian intelligence operation, though prosecutors have not confirmed Russian involvement. Compliance action. Organizations managing sensitive registries must implement credential monitoring for abnormal access patterns and geographic anomalies. Require multi-factor authentication for privileged database access and log all queries for post-breach forensic analysis. Review access control lists quarterly to revoke stale institutional credentials. Source: The Record. Wi-Fi sensing technology can identify individuals through radio wave patterns. Researchers at Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, KIT, demonstrated Wi-Fi sensing technology that identifies individuals by analyzing how Wi-Fi signals interact with their physical presence. When radio signals travel through a space, they are reflected, scattered, or absorbed by objects and people. By comparing expected signal behavior with actual received signals, researchers can create images of surroundings and identify persons present, similar to how cameras work with light waves. Professor Thorsten Struve explained the technique observes radio wave propagation to infer details about the environment. Compliance action. Privacy officers should assess Wi-Fi infrastructure for unintended surveillance capabilities and evaluate whether passive Wi-Fi sensing constitutes biometric data collection under GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, or BIPA. The Biometric Information Privacy Act. Public notice and consent mechanisms may be required for commercial deployments. Source: Schneier on security. Next section, policy changes. RFK Jr. S. A SIP Charter Amendment withdrawn for procedural violations. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. S. Revised Charter for the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. A SIP was withdrawn for failing to follow federal public notification requirements. Federal law requires the Secretary to provide a written statement that discretionary advisory committees are being formed in the public interest, establish what that public interest is, and publish public notice to the Federal Register. Kennedy rewrote the ASIP governing charter to allow members without expertise in immunizations and public health, but did not follow any of these procedural requirements. The withdrawal follows a district court injunction on Kennedy's initial ASIP overhaul for violating the Administrative Procedures Act by hand-picking unqualified members without following procedural law. The Trump administration is appealing the injunction. Source: TechDirt. NPR announces layoffs following Republican attacks on public broadcasting. NPR is implementing buyouts and layoffs to trim $8 million from its $300 million annual budget, following Trump administration attacks on public broadcasting. Congress obliterated the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, CPB budget of $1.1 billion for fiscal years 2026 and 2027 after an executive order targeting NPR, PBS, and member station funding. The CPB voted to dissolve itself in January 2026 after losing all funding. A federal judge later ruled the defunding violated the First Amendment, but the ruling came too late to save the CPB. NPR received $113 million in private donations, $80 million from Connie and Steve Ballmer, to offset losses, but that money is dedicated to technological innovation rather than saving journalism jobs. The CPB historically distributed over 70% of its funding to approximately 1,500 public radio and TV stations. Source: TechDirt. Supreme Court analysis. Louisiana v. Calais effectively dismantled Voting Rights Act Section 2. Legal scholars argue Louisiana v. Calais rewrote the Voting Rights Act despite Justice Samuel Alito's claims the court was merely updating evidentiary requirements. The ruling makes vote dilution claims under Section 2 effectively impossible by changing the benchmark for determining whether district boundaries unlawfully dilute minority electoral opportunity. The 1,982 amendments to the VRA created a results or effects test replacing the intent requirement from Mobile v. Bolden. Jingles v. Thornburg established preconditions, including that minority voters must be sufficiently numerous and compact to constitute a reasonably configured district without violating traditional districting criteria. Calais may have turned 14th Amendment racial gerrymandering claims into a tool to undo VRA-compliant redistricting maps. Compliance action. State and local redistricting authorities should consult civil rights attorneys before implementing Calais evidentiary standards, document traditional redistricting criteria analysis, and preserve community of interest evidence for anticipated Section 2 litigation. Source: Scotto S. blog. Next section, regulatory guidance. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, contractor exposed AWS Gov Cloud credentials in public GitHub repository. A CISA contractor left AWS Gov Cloud credentials in a public GitHub repository named Private CISA, exposing cloud keys, tokens, plaintext passwords, logs. and other sensitive CISA/DHS assets. Git Guardian researcher Guillaume Valadin flagged the repository on May 15, noting the CISA administrator disabled GitHub's default setting that blocks users from publishing SSH keys or other secrets in public code repositories. Security expert Brian Krebs called it the worst leak I've witnessed, noting it represented textbook poor security hygiene. The exposure comes after the Trump administration gutted CISA by moving officials from cybersecurity work to deportation paperwork processing and conducting mass firings. In 2020, CISA Director Chris Krebs was fired after accurately stating the 2020 election had been secure. Compliance action. Federal contractors must enable GitHub secret scanning and push protection across all repositories. Implement automated credential rotation for cloud infrastructure and audit commit logs for disabled security features. Conduct immediate credential sweeps of all public repositories and revoke any exposed keys. Source: TechDirt. Next section, Compliance Takeaways. Alper Surveillance Controls. Cease warrantless Alper database searches for administrative functions, school residency, employment background checks, code violations. Legal departments should assess civil liability exposure under state privacy and wiretap statutes and require judicial authorization for investigative queries. GitHub security defaults. Enable GitHub secret scanning and push protection across all organizational repositories. Audit existing public repositories for exposed credentials and implement automated detection for API, keys, cloud credentials, and authentication tokens. Federal contractors face heightened scrutiny after the CISA Gov cloud leak. EU sanctions screening. Hosting providers, VPN services, and data centers must implement enhanced due diligence for customers in high-risk jurisdictions. Screen new customers and existing accounts against EU and OFAC sanctions lists monthly. Document compliance procedures for regulatory audits following Dutch arrests. Factor receipt compliance. Retailers must verify point-of-sale systems truncate card numbers to last 5 digits and omit expiration dates from electronically printed receipts. Conduct quarterly compliance audits and implement automated validation before receipt printing to avoid statutory damages. Public repository credential hygiene. Organizations must enforce GitHub's default secret protection settings and prohibit developers from disabling them. Implement pre-commit hooks for local repositories that block credentials from being committed. Rotate any credentials in commit history of repositories ever made public, even if later made private. That concludes today's legal and privacy brief. From Carolina, Clear Tech. For informational purposes only, not legal advice.